Ursula von der Leyen is getting ready to jump on a flight to Australia, and the whole point is to wrap up a trade deal that completely fell apart back in 2023. Those talks were basically dead in the water. Europe and Australia just couldn't figure things out, mainly because of arguments over how much beef Australia could sell to Europe. Then Trump went ahead and started his big tariff fight, and out of nowhere, those boring old trade talks suddenly came back to life. The whole Australia-EU trade story went from total failure to almost finished, and all of that happened in less than a year. And honestly, the pattern here is pretty hard to miss. Trump's whole messy approach is basically pushing countries right into Europe's open arms, and Europe is moving way faster than anyone thought possible to lock in a new kind of trade world that doesn't really need America at the center. I'm Elf of House on YouTube. I have a PhD in computer science, and I use data analysis to spot patterns in geopolitics and economics. For a really long time, everyone just assumed the same thing. America is the big boss of global trade. Other countries kind of just orbit around it and follow its lead, and the whole relationship between America and Europe basically sets all the rules for everyone. But that whole idea, it's falling apart right now, in real time. Trump pulled the U.S. out of trade deals, slapped tariffs on his own allies, and started demanding that NATO countries spend a whopping 5% of their entire economy on defense, while also making people wonder if America would even show up to help if something went wrong. When the Iran war kicked off, Trump asked NATO allies to send warships through the Strait of Hormuz. Not a single major country said yes. The whole group effort never really came together. America's allies are watching all this unpredictability play out and quietly starting to think, okay, we need to look out for ourselves. Von der Leyen pretty much said the quiet part out loud when she addressed EU ambassadors directly. Her words were, "The West as we knew it no longer exists." She pointed out that while U.S. trade makes up about 13% of everything traded in the whole world, the other 87% is already happening with everyone else. And she also said, everyone is asking for more trade with Europe. It's not just about economic ties, it's also about establishing common rules and predictability. That last word, predictability, is kind of a massive deal right now. When the U.S. president is out here threatening to basically take over allied countries, throwing tariffs around with zero warning, and flipping his own policies every single week, Europe is stepping up as the calm and steady option instead, and the numbers actually back that up. Von der Leyen said that a huge 83% of EU trade already happens with countries that aren't the US, and that the whole world basically wants to do business with Europe. She also mentioned she's having non-stop conversations with world leaders and could honestly keep those talks going around the clock. And this isn't just talk for the cameras. Europe has been closing or nearly closing major trade deals at a speed that has honestly never been seen before. The Mercosur deal got officially signed on January 17, 2026. That's Europe joining forces with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay. We're talking about 700 million people total, the biggest trade bloc either side has ever negotiated, period. Those talks actually started all the way back in 1999. They got completely stuck for 25 whole years. Then, in December 2024, Europe and Mercosur finally shook hands on a deal, and by January 2026, it was already done and signed. By May, which is right around the corner, it could already start being used in practice. The deal wipes out tariffs on 91% of goods being traded between the two sides. EU companies save over 4 billion euros every single year just from this deal. Brazil's government contracts market alone is worth more than 8 billion euros a year. And now European companies can actually go and compete for those contracts. India also wrapped up its trade deal with the EU in January 2026. Von der Leyen's very first trip with her brand new commission was straight to India to level up the partnership with the biggest democracy on the entire planet. Mexico, Switzerland, and Indonesia all got their deals wrapped up in just the last few months too. Australia is next on the list. Von der Leyen lands there on March 23rd, sits down with Prime Minister Anthony Albanese on March 24th, and hopefully the deal gets signed right then and there. Total goods traded between the EU and Australia hit 47.2 billion euros in 2025, with Europe coming out ahead by about 26.5 billion euros. And here is where the Australia deal gets really interesting, because it's not just about making cars and wine cheaper to swap around. Von der Leyen said the deal is going to open up access to really critical raw materials like lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, and hydrogen. And by the way, Australia is the #1 lithium producer in the entire world. The EU actually signed a special memorandum of understanding with Australia back in May 2024, specifically to team up on these critical minerals, basically to loosen China's tight grip on those supply chains. The demand for rare earth metals is expected to shoot up 7 times over by 2050, and lithium demand, that's expected to explode by 21 times. China currently controls over 80% of battery and solar manufacturing. Europe is basically building its own backup supply chains piece by piece, and Australia is the anchor partner in that whole strategy. If you want to get sharper at reading these kinds of big geopolitical moves, spotting the pattern before it even hits the headlines, check out my book, Awake, The Practice of Critical Thinking in an Age of Soft Lies. It's all about sharpening how you think in a world where the rules keep changing faster than the news can keep up. It's out as an ebook and audiobook. Subscribers get 10% off, and you can grab the first chapter completely for free. The link is right there in the description below. The European Investment Bank has already signed a separate deal with Australia to strengthen cooperation on critical raw materials, with both sides committed to doing things responsibly and without trashing the environment. Australian companies are already showing up and operating inside Europe. Vulcan Energy's lithium project running in Germany is one real example. Talga Group's graphite mine sitting in Sweden is another. And then there's Jervois Finland's cobalt refinery that's actively being expanded. These are not just simple trade deals anymore. They're basically full-scale industrial strategies designed to lock down the supply chains that run everything: electric vehicles, clean energy, defense production, and digital infrastructure. On top of all that, Europe is also actively working on deals with the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, the UAE, and 5 countries spread across Eastern and Southern Africa. Von der Leyen put it straight: our trade network has never expanded so fast. Now let's just think out loud about where all of this could actually lead. If Europe keeps going at this pace, and right now there is absolutely zero sign of it slowing down, by 2030, the EU will likely have locked in formal trade relationships covering most of the global economy outside the United States. That doesn't mean America gets completely left out in the cold, not literally, but it does mean America's ability to push other countries around through trade gets a whole lot weaker. When allies can route their trade through Europe, tap into European money markets, and plug into European supply chains, they just don't need American goodwill nearly as much anymore. The relationship between the US and Europe will still matter, absolutely, but it's just not the only option on the table anymore, and in geopolitics, having other options is basically the most powerful thing you can have. The whole pattern is already right there in front of everyone. It's forming, and it's visible. The Australia-EU trade deal crashed in 2023 over beef quotas. Then Trump's tariffs hit, global trade tensions piled up everywhere, and suddenly negotiations jumped back to life. Australia looked at America's unpredictable behavior and basically decided that Europe was just the safer, smarter bet. And that right there is the whole mechanism in a nutshell. Trump creates uncertainty and chaos. Countries go looking for something more stable. Europe shows up offering stability and open market access. Deals get done. Then the whole thing repeats. Trump's whole idea was for allies to spend more on defense, buy more American products, and fall in line with American foreign policy. But what's actually happening instead is allies are pouring money into European-made defense equipment, signing trade deals with Europe, and plugging themselves right into EU-led supply chains. The goal was supposed to strengthen American dominance, but the actual result ended up turbocharging Europe's rise as its own major power center in the world. The real geopolitical question at the end of the day isn't whether the USA stays a big economy, because it clearly will. The real question is whether it stays the economy that everyone absolutely cannot live without. And the trade data is slowly but clearly starting to point toward not so much anymore. When von der Leyen says the world wants to trade with Europe, she's not making a prediction about some future possibility. She's literally just describing what's already happening right now. Trump's entire tariff strategy was built on the assumption of having leverage, push hard, make it hurt, force concessions, and reassert dominance. But leverage only actually works when the other side has no way out, and what we're watching unfold right now is countries building their way out and doing it fast. Australia locks in critical minerals access with Europe. Mercosur gets full market access without needing America's approval or blessing. India levels up its strategic partnership. Every single deal chips away a little more at how much countries depend on the U.S. as their main trade anchor. The more choices countries have, the less Washington gets to call the shots. Now, this shift is still in its early stages. We honestly don't know yet whether Europe becomes the brand new center of global trade, or whether we're just moving toward a world where no single power dominates anyone else. What is becoming really clear, though, is that the old model, where whatever America prefers basically defines how global commerce works, is breaking down a whole lot faster than anyone expected. The connection to currency, however, is very direct and very serious. If you want to understand how trade architecture shapes who actually controls the world's money, watch the video playing on your screen right now about how the petrodollar is starting to break down. Iran restricting passage through Hormuz shifts toward yuan-based trading. The pressure keeps piling up and building on top of itself. When global trade starts flowing through Europe instead of the US, demand naturally shifts away from dollars and toward euros or yuan or other currencies. Trade flows and reserve currency status basically move together as one. Thank you all so much for watching. Go watch that video next.